Welcome to the podcast. Today we have our last installment of our for now anyway, of our more personal and family stories. And to do that, we are talking all about autism today with autism and where we can live or what setting that might be more safe for autistic or child that might have a tendency to leave the house. And to do that, we are welcoming Victor Antunez. He blends his expertise in Miami real estate with his experience as a father to an autistic child. This unique combination allows him to guide families with emotionally intense kids through home buying challenges. Victor's mission is to empower family like his own, transforming challenges into opportunities for connection and growth. He also has a book that we will be talking about on the podcast. Let's welcome Victor. Welcome to Parenting the Intensity, where we'll talk all about how we can drop the general parenting advice that doesn't work with our emotionally intense kids anyway, and let go of the unrealistic expectations society puts on us as parents. Together, we'll find solutions and ideas that work for you and your kids. Chances are, deep down, you know what they need, but you need a little encouragement to keep going on harder days and permission to do things differently and help you fully trust that you already are a wonderful parent to your exceptional but challenging kids. Do you read all the things, listen to all the things, take all the courses, and you know a whole lot of things about parenting, but you struggle to actually apply them in your real life? Then you're in luck. I just started the Parenting the Intensity community, which is a monthly group support for parents of emotionally intense kids. And the goal is exactly that, to take all the information you learn from the podcast and from all the other sources and adapt them so that it work for your child and your family, your reality, because things can work, but not always the same way for everybody. So the same thing might need to be adapted to work for you. And sometimes it's hard to sort through everything to choose the right things so that you can really enjoy your life and your kids, not always being afraid of the next outburst. You can join by clicking on the link in the show notes or on the website. Hi, Victor. Welcome to the podcast. I'm really glad to have you today. I think we're going to talk on a subject that is probably a bit forgotten. So I'm really glad to have you here today.
I'm glad to be here, Anouk. Thank you for having me.
So to start, can you tell me a little bit more of why you're doing what you're doing?
I'm Victor Antunez. I'm based in Miami. I have a 6-year-old autistic daughter, and I'm a real estate agent. So I blog quite a bit about the intersection of real estate and autism. And because of just different experiences in my life, I decided to write a book about it. The first one was about relocating with an autistic or special needs child, and it was based on my personal experience. And then once we were relocated in the new home, there's also the process of getting your house to be autism friendly, sensory friendly. So I wrote another book about that. So, you can find me on my blog, miamiautismdad.com. And there, I blog, it's mostly about Miami, I'll be very honest, but I do blog about things that do have a lot of carryover no matter what neighborhood you're in. And you can also find my books there.
Great. Super interesting. And so how does and I just want to start by saying, because not everybody in are the listeners of the podcast have autistic children. But I think that what you're going to share applies to much more than just autistic children. It applies also to any eye sensitive kids, and a lot of the emotionally intense kids do have sensitivity more intensely than other kids. So I think lots of what we're going to talk about today can apply to much more than just autistic kids. So I just want the listeners to just not stop listening because they don't have an autistic child.
So sensory sensitive kids, it will apply to any of those kids under that big umbrella.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in the emotionally intense kids that parents that I talk to, lots of their kids do have some sensitive issues to some extent. So I think it will apply to a lot of them. So just wanted to um, leave that little thing here because I know it's not the same for everybody.
Okay.
Like autism is not the reality for everyone listening. So how
No, it's
does
not.
no, but and it's still, and also there's a lot like right now we're seeing more and more kids being diagnosed later in life, and we're realizing that autism is different than what we thought it is. And I think that's also like some might have kids that will learn in 10 years that are autistic too. It's possible because it's like there's different level and different ways to express like that autism can show. So it's not always clear from a like young age. Like I'm guessing it was for
No.
your daughter since she's 6 and already diagnosed. It was pretty clear young, but it's not always the case. So sometimes your kids can be autistic and you just don't know.
Well, my daughter, she was born quite typical, and it was around 2 years of age where her behavior just completely changed. And as first-time parents, my wife and I, we just thought, oh, it's just cute behavior because we had nothing to gauge by. And it was actually my
Mm-hmm.
mother-in-law who told us, you need to have that girl checked because she's just not developing right. So
Mm-hmm.
I would tell a lot of parents, if you're a first-time parent and your child's behavior just all of a sudden just changes dramatically, have your kid diagnosed because I do quite, obviously as I have an autistic child, I do quite a bit of reading on this subject. And a lot of kids are just not diagnosed. Like underdiagnosis is a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the problem with that is that if your kid is not diagnosed, then all of the public services that that you may be entitled to wherever you live, they're not going to have access because you
Mm-hmm.
have to have the diagnosis. And then, at least in the States, you get what's called an IEP, an individualized education plan. And
Mm-hmm.
then based on that, you'll get your child will get the services that they need, but you can't get the IEP until you have the diagnosis. So it's just critical for parents, if your child's behavior just changes dramatically or it's not the typical milestones for their age, have them diagnosed. I mean, it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
scary. It stressed my wife out a lot more than me, but I'm older than her, so I was able just to handle it mentally better. But it's better to know than to not know.
Yeah, yeah, that's I did a podcast with some of that content already, explaining why, but I think also it depends on a lot of factor for sure. And some kids that it shows earlier than others also that they're developing
Yes.
differently than the norm. Some kids it's not as obvious, so I think that's also a challenge sometimes, and they can be misdiagnosed. And I lived that through in, in my house. We got lots of misdiagnosed before we got the right diagnosis. So sometimes it can be a struggle. And so how does like the environment we live in, our house, how does that impact children?
Well, it's a huge impact. I'm gonna give an example. Her My daughter's therapist, he asked us, okay, bring me a photo of her play area. Okay, so we brought a photo, and my wife and I, we were quite proud of the play area because we had bought these foam flooring mats, and they're like checkerboard colors, and there's like 4 different colors, and we had to, you know, each color was different, like it was yellow, then blue, then red, then green. And when the therapist saw that, he says, no, that's no good. That's too many colors. You're just going to just overload your daughter. So what you need to do is put all the greens together, all the yellows together, all the blues together, all the reds together. And so we followed his instructions. And when we did it, I have to admit to you, even as a non-autistic person, when I looked at it, I found it quite relaxing to have it like that. So,
Yes.
there are just very obvious things that, when you're new to it, they're not obvious. But once you follow the therapist recommendations, like, oh yeah, that's very calming. So
Yeah.
that was a big one for us. So it's things
And
like
it's
that.
so simple also, like, and it's something that
So simple.
we see often. And what we're describing, those tiles on the floor, I think so many people have that in their house, and lots of like
Yes.
most of the time they're displayed that way, like a puzzle with all the colors mixed
Yes.
up. I think it's just something what
Yes.
we see and we replicate that without necessarily thinking much of it. But as you said, you put that like that and you're, oh, it's less stimulating. And I think that applies to
Yes.
every children might benefit
And
sometimes from less stimulation.
everybody. Oh yes, yeah. And then like we put some cushions on the wall, and the colors are very a light baby blue and a very light pink, and it's also just very calming, for her and for us. So these are just things that when you reach out to the experts, that it's obvious to them because they work with it every single day. But you as a new parent, it's like obvious, but once you do, like, oh yeah, it's very calming.
Yeah, and
And it's
if you're
interesting
not as
about like the
strict.
checkerboard colors.
Hmm.
No, you wouldn't know. Then like the checkerboard colors, you've seen the autism sign, right? It's like puzzle pieces.
Hmm.
A lot of autistic people don't like that. They find it quite disturbing. So it's interesting that what is the symbol, the international symbol of autism, a lot of autistic people don't like it. And then when you hear that complaint, you're like, I can understand why they wouldn't like it because all those colors can be a little bit upsetting. I gotta
Yeah.
admit.
Yeah, interesting. And I've never really thought of who created that, but lots of the time it's not coming from autistic people. So it might
No.
be, yeah, it's something that I think it's an entire subject in itself, but it's
Yeah.
definitely interesting to see that sometimes things like that are not coming from people that are directly touched by the situation and might not represent really what they feel for sure.
Yeah. So in fact, if you look at the new autism symbol, it's a figure of eight, which is the infinity symbol.
Hmm.
And it's like the colors of the rainbow, but they blend into each other. And that is actually quite calming, that infinity symbol with the colors. So I like that much better. So that I hope that catches on because it is very calming, whereas the puzzle pieces, not so much.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, makes sense. Totally makes
Yeah.
sense. And
Yeah.
is there any other things, any other example that you can give that you like maybe what sign parents can see in their kids that point to the fact that reorganizing their physical space might be a good idea?
Oh, wow. The thing about autistic kids is that they're all different. It's like, like you take like a typical human being, like you're
Hmm.
different than me. We're going to have
Yeah.
very just different taste. And then you're going to have nonverbal kids like my kid and verbal kids. So obviously verbal kids that, they can verbalize something and they can even tell you what they think is good. Now, in terms of the house, we spoke about earlier, the biggest consideration is the neighborhood over the house because houses can't be fixed. Like,
Mhm.
if you move into a house and let's say the house is painted red on the interior, well, that's an easy fix. You
Yeah.
just get a painter and you can paint it to whatever calming color you want. But if you're in a noisy neighborhood next to a highway, well, you can't fix that. It's not very fixable.
No.
So I tell people is begin with the neighborhood and work in.
Hmm. So if they need to move, or if it's really their kids is really dysregulated or overstimulated, looking at moving house might be a need for the family basically, and the house they're in might not be adaptable. Is that what you're saying because of the neighborhood?
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, I'll speak more about the highways. I just brought it up. A very common thing with autistic kids is wandering. They call it excursions. Well, they'll just leave the house and they'll just walk away. In fact, there was a case here in Miami like a week or two ago where this 14-year-old autistic boy, the mom sends him outside to take out the garbage. And one of the neighbors has got a camera, and you see the boy walk outside the house, put the garbage in the garbage, and then he just leaves. you know, he just left the house and they didn't find him until the next day in an Apple store
Wow.
nearby. But the kid was just gone and he's 14. He's verbal, but he's just like in his own little world. And, at 14, you're very vulnerable. So, that kid could just as easily have walked into the highway. And in fact, maybe like a few months ago, a 10-year-old boy in Miami, he fell into the Miami River. And just by the grace of God, a Miami policeman was watching him, ran over, jumped in the river, and saved this boy from the river. That boy, 10 years old, he probably was not a swimmer. He was going to drown. So these are just considerations that when you're picking a neighborhood, like if you're in a place like Miami, there's a lot of water hazards. Well, that should be a very big consideration because drowning is, I think it's the number one cause of death with autistic kids, accidental death.
Mm-hmm.
It's drowning. And then this wandering is a big problem with autistic kids. So if you're in a neighborhood with a lot of traffic, you should also, just take that into consideration as far as your home, your home situation is concerned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So for example, if people are choosing to move, um, like in general, kids that are highly sensitive or autistic kids don't necessarily do well with change. So moving is stressful for anybody. How do you deal with that with the kids that struggle with change from a starting point?
It depends on the kid. Let's assume that they're verbal or not verbal. You should begin talking to your kid about this way ahead of time. And
Mhm.
don't assume that just because they're nonverbal that they're not understanding you. Now,
No, of course.
granted, a 10-year-old, like my daughter, she's 6 years old, she's autistic. She is not going to understand at the same level of a 6-year-old typical child,
Hmm.
but at some level, she will understand. At what level? I don't even know. It's impossible to know.
Hmm.
So the first thing to tell parents is as far ahead of time as possible, be talking to your child of this upcoming change. And then let's say that you're going to be flying to your new home. Well, if this is going to be your child's first trip to the airport, take them there. Flying for your right. If you have to fly, then if possible, take your child there 1 or 2 times before the actual trip. That way, when they go to this new environment, it's not their very first time. And if you can interact with airport employees, because for your child, having these people in uniform could be a little bit scary because
So you addressed the wandering aspect and the water safety. You also briefly talked about noise in the neighborhood.
Mhm.
Can you just talk a little bit more about that part? Why
Sure.
noise can be a problem?
Okay. So, different autistic kids are going to have different sensitivities.
Mhm.
Like my daughter, she happens to love fireworks. I mean, she can't get enough of fireworks, but we accustomed her to that from a very young age. But there are other kids that no matter what you do, the slightest sound is going to set them off. So, you need to know your child because you are
Mhm.
literally the expert in your child. So what I tell people when moving to a new neighborhood is that the home can be fixed much easier than the neighborhood,
Yeah, yeah.
right? If the colors in the house are off, well, you can just paint the house. That's not a problem.
Mhm.
But if you live in a noisy neighborhood and your kid is, hypersensitive, well, you can't really fix that.
No.
So, start with the neighborhood and then work inwards towards the house is the advice I would give parents as far as like noise. And also it's, like my daughter likes going to the park and I like taking her there. And one thing that's a problem with her and my 4-year-old as well, who's not autistic, is they like to just run off. So I don't go to parks unless it's fenced, because that way I can just let them run as much as they want
Mhm.
without having to be a helicopter parent. So, these are just things you should look for in a neighborhood.
Mhm. Mhm. Is there anything else that you would recommend looking for other than fence park noise security, but like big roads and water?
Yeah, big roads. In fact, we just had a recent case. This 14-year-old boy, he's autistic. His mother sent him to take the garbage out.
Hmm.
Well, one of the neighbors across the street had one of those Ring doorbell cameras. So you see the boy, he walks out, he puts the garbage, in the garbage can, and then he just walks off. And then later that day, they found him like a few miles away at a shopping center. He had found his way to one of the Apple stores, and one of the employees, because we have what's called an Amber Alert. Whenever a
Hmm.
child goes
Yeah.
missing, they'll set up an Amber Alert, and everybody's notified.
Hmm.
And this person, he's looking at this little boy, playing with computers. He's like, I think that this is the
It's the
boy.
description.
Yeah. So it's called eloping. So if you have a child who's prone to eloping, that you might want to really reconsider whether you should live on a busy street. Now,
Hmm.
fortunately, this boy, he wasn't in a high traffic street, but he was in a high traffic area. So fortunately, he was okay when he was found. But that's another consideration is if your child is prone to eloping, you know, are the streets safe? Because
Hmm.
that mother, she thought, he's 14. I'll send him take the garbage out. He's probably done it a ton of times before. What could go wrong? Well, this time he
Yeah,
walked off. So,
he
it's just
decided to
things that
go. Yeah, and I would say that's a
yeah, to go for a
consideration
walk.
for many kids. Like ADHD kids can also
Of
have
course.
that tendency of just
Yes.
wanting that liberty and just running really fast to go to anything. So that's a
Yes, yes.
concern for a lot of kids for sure.
Yeah, so that's
Um,
another thing to look out for.
yeah, and lots of kids that are more sensitive, more intense, or autistic kids, they don't necessarily do well with change. So if family needs to move, do you have any recommendation to help to smooth the transition, basically?
Well, I mean, first, as much as possible, include your child in the moving process. Now, I'll use my daughter as an example. She's nonverbal, and it's hard to get eye contact out of her. So I don't, when I talk to her, I'm not really sure how much is penetrating. But
Mm-hmm.
even so, we include her in everything. We talk, okay, Chloe, we're gonna go do this now. Chloe, we're gonna go here now.
Mm-hmm.
We always let her know, and at some level, it does penetrate because that does help.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to be moving, you definitely want to include your child, and don't assume because you don't know how much is getting in, but
Mm-hmm.
something is getting in.
Yeah,
Now,
and
as
even
far
with
as
like babies do understand not necessarily the word and the content, but they understand the energy that we put behind things.
yes,
So
yes,
kids with like autistic kids at 6, even if their development, like the emotional development, might be a bit delayed, or they have um, language like struggle or of any sort, they can still understand a lot of things, probably much more than we think they do. In
yeah,
fact.
we don't know. So I just always assume that always treat your children like they are a complete adult, a complete
Hmm.
human being, and that they understand everything, which obviously we know they don't, but how much they get, we never know. So
Hmm.
in terms of like the actual travel day, if you're flying and they've never been to an airport, well, it'd be a good idea to go there a few days before and get them acclimated to the airport environment. And if you can, interact with some employees. Now, more and more airlines, they've got autism friendly services, but you've got to call ahead of time. Because
Hmm.
if you show up on the day of, well, you know what, you're kind of like,
Yeah.
you're gambling that they're going to be ready for you or they're not. And in
Hmm.
fact, like the Miami International Airport, they've got a room reserved just for autistic kids. They've
Hmm.
got a badge they can give the kids. So when they walk around, they're giving, a preferential treatment, and just it's easier to get through security and all that.
Hmm.
But you've got to call ahead of time.
Yeah.
So these are things that do before the travel day. Interact with employees. Let the airline know so they can prepare for you. Let the airport know so they can prepare for you.
Hmm.
Now, if you're driving, I'm going to assume that your kid has probably been in the car a ton of times. But if you're going for like, let's say, cross state, make sure you take a lot of their comfort toys and all, just the different things that are going to make that trip a lot easier,
Yeah. For
and
it's
plan
not
for a lot of
like any
breaks.
big trip or long trip, pack extra stuff to help them transition and kill time.
Right. And like in Florida, we have some highways that have got a lot of rest stations
Hmm.
and some that don't. So, if you're in an area like that where you just know that these highways have got a lot of rest areas dedicated, and some don't, maybe choose one that does have it. Now, here in Florida, the one that has the rest stations, it's a paid toll road, so you will pay. But under those circumstances, I would consider it a very worthwhile investment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not necessarily, I'm guessing it's not a huge amount also to
No, it's
use
not
the
free.
highway.
It's not free, but you get something for your money. You get extra rest stations, and they're
Hmm.
nice, and they're set up for tourists, and they're lighted, and there's a police presence. So it's very. I find it worth it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. If you cannot stop, it can be a challenge for sure. If it's a long road. So it's
Yeah, and
worth
then
it.
the other highways that don't have these dedicated rest stations, of course, there's exits you can get off, but you never know what you're going to find. It might be a nice place, it might be dirty, it might be noisy and crowded, it might not be. Whereas on the paid roads, it's all very nice and controlled and quiet and set up with bathrooms and all this. So it's a worthwhile investment. So these are the kind of things that you can plan ahead of time, or your autistic kid and even your neurotypical kids if they're little.
Hmm. Hmm. I would say here, rest stop are not really nice, but they're all free. Yeah, that's life. Great. And any other recommendation for the move, or is that covers it?
I mean, obviously, if you're buying, I'll tell you what's happening now. It happened with the COVID and it's still continuing. A lot of people are buying homes sight unseen, which there was a time when that never happened. And
No.
now it's happening more. Yes, people are buying, they're moving from California to Florida without ever stepping foot in the home, which is just amazing. But I'm not going to judge because I don't know their circumstances.
Hmm.
So if at all possible, you have an autistic kid, it would be a really good idea to come ahead of time, make sure you like the neighborhood, make sure
Hmm.
you like the house. Because a house can be great in pictures, and then when you get there, it's not exactly what you thought it would be.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
sight unseen is fine if you don't have kids, but if you have kids, I would say that's probably not the best way to buy a house. Although, like I said, more and more
Hmm.
people are doing it, which I just find amazing. But
It's
if you have
impressive.
autistic kids or ADHD, then you definitely want to come ahead of time and make sure that that house is everything it is in pictures. Because stepping in a house, and that house, if it's just an older couple, it might just be fine
Hmm.
on the photos. But then you get there with an autistic kid, you're like, oh, wait a minute, this color doesn't work, this room doesn't work, this layout doesn't work, and you
Yeah.
just might not get that sense from the photos.
Yeah. Yeah. And definitely harder to like get a feel for the neighborhood if you've never been in person because Google Map is limited.
Yeah, it's getting better every day, but there's nothing like stepping foot in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
Nothing at all.
definitely. Definitely. I can
No.
say like we moved last year and we were out hunting and sometimes I got somewhere and was like, oh, I thought the neighbors were way farther than they are in fact from
Yeah.
Google Map. Like it's not
Yeah.
100% that. And
Yeah.
the
So
pictures
those,
are often like better than real life when you look at
of
pictures of the
course,
listings.
yes.
It's part of the
You
selling
know,
process.
it's like people's profile pictures on Facebook or whatever. You always
Exactly.
look better in the pictures. So same thing for a house and a
Yeah,
neighborhood.
we show our best side for sure.
Of course.
And you do have a book. Would you like to talk a bit about that?
Sure. So, based on my own experience, I wrote a book called The Autism and Special Needs Family Relocation Blueprint. And in that, I cover everything, the pre-move phase, checklist. I talk about traveling by air, by car, you know, finding a new house, working with a real estate agent, how to look for schools, how to look for support groups. So these are all things that with autistic kids, ADHD or other, developmental
Mm,
disabilities, it's it'd be a very good tool to have in your toolbox. And, I forget right now the price. It's maybe $15-20 on Amazon. And if you're making this kind of move, just the checklist alone would make it highly valuable. And full disclosure, I don't make that much money off selling these books, but
no.
they're more of like just a service to the community. And
Mhm.
for the small investment, it's definitely worth it.
Great. And we'll put the link in the show notes so that people can check it out. Is there
Great.
anything you want to add before we close?
No, I think that we've done a very good job as far as covering the neighborhoods, um, covering travel,
Hmm.
covering the houses. And then, I talked about, again, in the book, I've got checklists for how to find different schools and support groups and therapy options. Like in Miami, it's Miami-Dade County. It's a very big county. There's a lot of municipalities. And there
Hmm.
are some areas where I love the houses, I love the neighborhoods, but they're newer. And because of that, they don't have the established hospitals and therapy centers. So you
Hmm.
might get a fantastic neighborhood, you might get a fantastic house, but you might end up having to drive half an hour or more to your kids' therapy sessions or schools. So, these are other considerations to take. And in fact,
Hmm.
I would tell people that when your kids are in the grade school level, that's when it's really, really valuable to live in the same neighborhood where the school is located. Because when they're that small, you're just going to be
Hmm.
involved in more school events. Whereas when they get to middle school and high school, kids, no matter what their developmental stage, they just become more and more independent. So, when your kids in junior high school or high school, you could live half an hour away and it might not affect as much.
Hmm.
Whereas when they're at the grade school level, if you're not in the same neighborhood, you're just going to be, because there's so many more school events at that age, you're going
Hmm.
to find yourself driving a lot. So
Yeah.
that is a really big consideration when the kids are little is as much as possible, try to be where the schools are located. And like I said, in Miami, there are some newer neighborhoods that are just, I love them. Big parks, everything, but there's no schools for the autistic kids. So these
Mm-hmm.
are all just trade-offs. In fact,
Yeah.
there's this economist I like to listen to. He says there's no perfect solutions. There's only trade-offs. So,
Mm-hmm.
you as a parent of one of these kids, when you find the perfect house, maybe it's not the perfect neighborhood. So there's always just these trade-offs.
Yeah. It's rare that we find the place where all the services we need are and the perfect
Yes,
neighborhood and the perfect house. We don't
yes.
need to touch anything. And yeah, that's
Very
that
rare,
happens
very
very
rare.
rarely for sure. Yeah.
Yes,
And I
yes,
think that's
yes.
very interesting. And also for some kids that might not qualify for special classes or special schools, if they need accommodation, not all schools are willing or set up to accommodate special needs kids. So I think that's a very great recommendation also to, before moving, checking with the different schools if it's something they can
Absolutely.
accommodate for. Of course, you never really know before you try, but you can have an idea when you ask what kind of accommodation are doable, or if you ask for the accommodation your kids need, and the reaction that you get will give you an idea for sure if they can accommodate or not.
Yes, and if you can, obviously, visit the school as well, because it's one thing to
Mhm.
talk over the phone. It's another thing to go in person and just feel the vibe. Because you go into a school, you can feel the vibe, and that's
Yeah.
always a good thing to do.
Yeah. Same as neighborhood, basically.
Yes, same as neighborhoods. You can feel the vibe.
Great. Thank you. Is there any resource that you used as a parent that you would like to share that you find useful?
You know what? I use Google Alerts actually. I'll go in there and I'll set it up and I'll put like autism friendly events, sensory events. I'll put museums and music festivals and all things like this in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And and you can do that for wherever you live in the world. Set up Google Alerts. So I use Google Alerts quite a bit, and a lot of events come up that I don't read the newspaper every day, nor do I plan on doing that. And that'd be the only other way to do it. But if you set up Google Alerts, this is a fantastic way to plug into the community, and it
Mm-hmm.
arrives in your mailbox, every morning, every week, whatever you set it up for.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's a fantastic free resource that you can use anywhere in the world.
Interesting. So that basically you have your own personal like person, or
Concierge.
yeah, concierge, or like
Yeah.
organizer from, like, it looks a bit like people in, like, yeah, it's a kind concierge, like people in a touristic
Mhm.
place, and that will give you your
Yes.
personal schedule. That's great. And so that and
Yes.
often we realize those events happen when it's too late.
When
It's already
yes, when
done,
it's too
or like
late.
it's tomorrow
Yes.
and we've planned something else and things like that. So love the idea of,
Right.
as soon as people register them on Google, you get informed. Basically, that's how
Yeah.
it works. I've never
Yes.
used that.
So let me tell you, you can use Google Alerts for anything. I mean,
Anything.
I even have one set up for my name. I want to know whenever my name shows up on the internet. And most of the time it's another Victor Antunez, but it's just you can use Google Alerts. But in particular with autistic kids or just even
Mhm.
family-friendly events, you can set it up and get this fantastic resource delivered right to your mailbox. So
Yeah.
it's a fantastic resource that I use all the time.
Yeah, super interesting. Thank you. And is there a specific place? I don't even know how to set that up. It's easy to find, I'm guessing. You just Google how to set up Google Alerts.
Right. And you have to have a Gmail account.
Yeah,
So if you have a Gmail account, if you just type in Google Alerts, the site will come up and then you can just set up the alerts and you can put the frequency in, and it's pretty self-explanatory. It's very user-friendly.
great. Interesting resource. Thank you. I love
Yes, it's a
asking
good one.
that question to parent. It comes with like all sorts of different resources I find really interesting. So thank you very much. So people can find you. We'll put the link for the books. Is there somewhere else that people can find you?
Sure. I blog at my website. It's miamiautismdad.com, and you can find me there.
Great, excellent. That will also be in the show notes. So thank you so much, Victor, for being here with us today.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it. I'm so glad you joined me today and took that time out of your intense life to focus on finding a new way to parent that works for you and your kids. To get the episodes as soon as they drop, make sure to subscribe to the podcast. And please leave a rating and review so other parents can find it too. Also, check out all the free resources on my website at familymoments.ca so you can take action on what's the most important for you right now. And take a deep breath, keep going. We're all in this together.